The sun was a hammer in 1884. The Arizona desert was its anvil. And upon that anvil, a woman named Esther Hale was being broken. She was a woman of soft edges and pale skin, too large and too white for a world that demanded hardness. Her skin, which held no color of its own, had been blistered by the relentless light, peeling away to reveal an angry, weeping pink beneath. Her hair, a shock of snow white, was matted with dust and sweat. She was a great foundering ship of a woman, beached on an ocean of sand and stone, and her belly, a high, taut drum, carried the last of her hope. He had left her here 2 days ago. Walter, the man who had bought her, paraded her, and then discarded her. He had called her his pale lily, his voice dripping with a showman's charm that curdled into contempt the moment the curtain fell. He'd brought her out to the desert, saying they were going to see the painted canyons. But that was a lie. When the wagon broke an axle, he had looked at her, his eyes finally empty of any pretense. An encumbrance, he had said, the words as flat and hot as the air. He had taken the water, the mule, and what little remained of their supplies, and he had walked away. At first, she didn't believe it. He would come back. It was just another one of his cruel games. But as the first day bled into a bruised twilight, the truth began to solidify in her gut, a cold, heavy stone. The second day was a lesson in agony. Thirst was a living thing, a predator with claws that scraped her throat raw. The child within her, once a comfort of flutters and rolls, had grown still, a heavy, worrying weight. Now, on the third day, resignation settled over her like a shroud. She no longer felt the burn of her skin. A strange, listless peace descended. She thought of her life, a parade of gawking faces and hushed whispers. Born an albino, she was an oddity. Growing into a woman of size, she became a spectacle. Walter had seen a business opportunity, marrying the giant pale woman and charging folks a nickel to see her. She had hated it, but she had endured it. Because loneliness was a far greater torment than shame. The baby had been a shock, a complication he had not intended, an encumbrance. She closed her eyes, the light still searing through her thin lids. The world had dissolved into a hum, the buzz of insects, the whisper of the hot wind. This was the end of the spectacle. No crowds, no nickels, just the sun, the sand, and the silent, immense judgment of the sky. She laid a hand on her belly. It was not her own death she mourned in that moment, but the death of the small, innocent life that had never had a chance to draw a single breath. But the hum grew louder. It resolved itself into a rhythm, a soft, steady thudding that was not her own heart. Hoofbeats. She thought it was a trick of the heat, a final mirage. But the sound grew closer. She forced her cracked lips apart, but no sound came out. She pried her eyelids open. A figure swam in the wavering curtain of heat. A horse and a rider, dark against the blinding glare. As it drew nearer, the shape solidified. A man, his skin the color of burnished copper, his long black hair bound by a simple leather cord. He was lean, dressed in buckskin, and he carried himself with a stillness that seemed a part of the landscape itself. He was Cheyenne, or Apache, one of the tribes Walter had spoken of with a mixture of fear and revulsion. He stopped his horse a dozen yards away, his gaze sweeping over the broken wagon, and then settling on her. And in that moment, Esther didn't know if she was looking at her savior or her executioner. Honaka had been tracking a ghost. The memory of his wife, taken by the coughing sickness 2 winters past, often drove him out into the solitary places. He wasn't hunting. He was simply letting the land hold his grief. He had seen the unnatural shape of the broken wagon from a ridge, a scar of civilization on the face of the desert. Then he had seen her. At first, he did not understand what he was looking at. She was a mound of white and red, like a fallen cloud stained by the sunset. Her skin was a horror, cooked by the sun he had learned to respect as both a giver and taker of life. He dismounted and approached, his movements fluid and silent. He saw the impossibly pale hair, the large, swollen body, and the pronounced swell of her belly. He had seen albinos among his own people, rare and often considered spiritually significant. But he had never seen one so afflicted. Her eyes fluttered open. The palest blue, almost colorless, filled with a terror so profound it transcended any barrier of language or race. He felt no revulsion. He saw no spectacle. He saw a human being at the very edge of life. He saw a mother, her child's life tied to her own fading thread. Duty was woven deep into the fabric of his soul. To leave her would be a violence against the natural order. He unslung the water skin from his horse, his movements deliberate and calm. He knelt beside her, unstopped the skin, and the simple sound of sloshing water made her entire body tremble. He lifted her head gently, his hands surprisingly cool against her fiery neck, and brought the water to her lips. Esther drank. The water was a shock, a miracle. It hurt, but it was the pain of life returning. She choked and sputtered, and he waited patiently. He said nothing. His face was a mask of concentration. She looked at him, at the high cheekbones, the strong line of his jaw, the deep-set eyes that held a sorrow she recognized, because she wore her own version of it. He was not the savage of Walter's stories. He was just a man who had not walked away. When she could drink no more, he let her head rest back on the sand. He scanned the horizon. They could not stay here. She was a large woman. Moving her would be a challenge, but it was a challenge he would meet. His decision was made in silence. He would not let the desert claim this woman and her child. Not today. The journey was a blur of misery. Honaka worked with an unnerving efficiency. He used blankets from the wagon to rig a travois, a simple sledge dragged behind his horse. Getting her onto it was an ordeal. He was strong, but her weight was considerable. He never showed any sign of impatience. For her, every jostle was a fresh agony. She drifted in and out of consciousness. He took her to a place the rock had hollowed out, a shallow cave tucked into the base of a mesa, its mouth shaded by a gnarled juniper. It was cooler here. He eased her off the travois onto a bed of blankets, his touch firm but careful. For the next several days, their world shrank to that cave. Their interactions were almost entirely without words. He would leave at dawn and return hours later with a rabbit or quail. He would leave water for her. The first time he tried to tend to her burns, she flinched away, a raw cry tearing from her throat. He stopped instantly, holding up his hands. In one, he held a poultice of crushed green leaves. He pointed to his own sun-darkened arm, then to the paste, then to her blistered skin. He was asking permission. The gesture was so unexpected, so respectful, it disarmed her. Walter had never asked permission for anything. Trembling, she gave a weak, hesitant nod. His touch was clinical, yet profoundly gentle. He applied the cool, soothing mash to her shoulders and face. The relief was immediate. She watched him, her fear slowly being replaced by a weary curiosity. He was a puzzle, the most silent man she had ever known. Sometimes at night she would wake and see him sitting by the small fire, staring into the flames. In those moments, his face was not a mask. It was a study in loss, a grief so profound it seemed to emanate from him like heat. He was a man hollowed out by something. She understood that emptiness. Her prejudice, the fear planted by Walter, began to wither in the face of his quiet, consistent decency. One afternoon, he returned with a small, intricately woven basket. He sat before her and began to work with thin strips of yucca fiber, mending it. Without thinking, Esther spoke, her voice a rusty croak. "What is your name?" He looked up, startled. He studied her for a long moment, then spoke a single word, his voice low and raspy from disuse. "Honaka. Honaka," she repeated. "I am Esther." He gave a slow nod. It was not friendship, not yet, but it was an acknowledgement. They were no longer just a task and a patient. They were two people with names. The days turned into a week, then two. Esther's strength began to return. Her skin healed. She could stand, leaning against the cool rock wall. She began to help in small ways, sorting herbs, mending a tear in his buckskin shirt. Their conversations were halting, built from the handful of English words he knew and the simple gestures they had perfected. He taught her the name for rabbit, for the juniper tree. She taught him the name for sky, for moon. One evening, as he cooked, the baby inside her gave a sudden, powerful kick. Esther gasped. Honaka looked over, his eyes questioning. She smiled, a real smile this time. "The baby," she said. "It moves." He came to her side. He looked at her swollen abdomen with an expression of awe. He hesitated, then slowly raised his hand, his gaze asking permission as it had before. Esther took his hand and placed it on her belly. His fingers were calloused and warm. Just as he touched her, the baby kicked again, a firm, insistent thump against his palm. A slow, wondrous smile spread across Honaka's face, transforming his somber features. It was the first time she had seen him truly smile. It was like watching the sun break over a dark canyon. In that moment, the last of her fear of him dissolved. He held his hand there for a long moment, a silent communion with the life that was to come. Then he looked at her, his dark eyes holding hers, and he spoke in his own language. The words were soft and flowing. She did not understand them, but she knew their meaning. It was a blessing. He began to speak more of his past. He told her of his wife, Istas, whose name meant snow. He spoke of the sickness that had taken her. He told her of his son, a small boy, who had followed his mother to the spirit world only a moon later. His grief was a vast open wound. Listening to him, Esther felt her own sorrow become something she could bear. Her loneliness was now a territory they occupied together. He was not just her rescuer anymore. He was becoming her friend. He began to carve a piece of cottonwood bark. Day after day he worked. The image was a turtle, its shell carved with the sun and the moon. "For the little one," he explained. "The turtle carries its home on its back. It is strong. It finds its way." The gift was a promise that this child would be strong, would have a home. Esther took it, her fingers tracing the smooth wood, and wept silent tears of gratitude. But their quiet existence was about to be shattered. The sound that shattered their peace was the sound that had begun it all. Hoofbeats. But not one horse this time. Two. Approaching fast. Honaka was instantly alert, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. He motioned for Esther to stay back in the deepest shadows of the cave and flattened himself against the rock at the entrance, a silent, deadly observer. Esther's heart hammered against her ribs. She recognized the arrogant posture of the lead rider before she could even make out his face. It was Walter. And with him was a hired gun, a man with a brutish face and a pistol strapped low on his hip. "I tell you, I heard the talk in Prescott," Walter was saying. "A prospector swore he saw a Cheyenne brave with a ghost woman living up in these mesas. It has to be her." He paused. "Damned woman is probably telling everyone I abandoned her. I can't have that." "So, what do you want to do?" the other man asked. "Just fetch her back?" Walter laughed, a dry, ugly sound. "Fetch her? Don't be a fool. I'm here to tie up a loose end. No body, no crime. We find her, we finish it, and the Indian too. No witnesses." Ice flooded Esther's veins. He hadn't come back for her. He had come to erase her. A primal, protective fury rose up in her. She looked at Honaka. His face was granite, his eyes fixed on the men below. He was one man against two. The odds were not good, Esther knew she could not just hide and wait for him to die for her. She was not the helpless creature Walter had left for dead. This land, this man, they had changed her. "She's got to be up in one of these caves," Walter said, dismounting. "Spread out. Find her." As the hired man moved to the left, Walter started toward their shelter. Honaka drew his knife, the polished stone blade gleaming. He was preparing to fight, to die. Esther acted. She scrambled to a pile of loose stones near the back of the cave. She picked up a rock the size of a loaf of bread. Peeking over the ledge, she saw the hired man, his back to her. Honaka was poised to ambush Walter, who was now only feet from the entrance. She did not hesitate. With a great heave, she threw the rock. It landed with a sickening thud several yards to the hired man's right. He yelled in surprise, spinning around, his attention completely diverted. "What was that?" "Probably just an animal," Walter called back, annoyed. But the sound had made him pause. It was the opening Honaka needed. He moved like a shadow detaching itself from the rock. He was on Walter in 2 silent strides, one hand clamping over his mouth, the other pressing the razor-sharp edge of his knife against the man's throat. Walter's eyes went wide with terror. The hired man turned back. "Mr. Vance!" He saw the scene, and his hand tightened on his pistol. "Let him go, Indian!" Honaka did not move. He was a statue of vengeance. Then Esther stepped out of the shadows and into the light. Her white hair was a wild halo. Her face was pale and determined. Her body, heavy with child, seemed to possess a formidable power. "Get out of here," she said, her voice shaking, but clear and strong. "Leave now." The gunman hesitated, aiming his pistol. The situation was a stalemate. If he shot, Walter would surely die. He looked at Esther, at the fierce, unyielding expression on her face. "This ain't my fight," the man suddenly muttered, lowering his gun. "You paid me to track, not to get into this mess." He backed away, mounted his horse, and without a backward glance, spurred the animal into a gallop and disappeared. They were alone. Honaka, Esther, and the man who had tried to destroy them both. Honaka's knife pressed deeper. A single drop of blood welled up on Walter's skin. Esther saw the rage in his eyes. She saw the ghosts of his wife and child demanding retribution. But then his gaze met hers. He saw the plea in her eyes. This was not their way. Killing him would make them like him. He let out a long, slow breath, releasing the rage. He shoved Walter away, sending him stumbling to the ground. Walter scrambled backward. You could have." "Go," Honaka said, his English clipped and hard. "My horse," Walter stammered. Honaka walked to the horse, cut the reins with a single flick of his knife, and gave the animal a sharp slap on the rump. It bolted, galloping off into the desert. He then picked up Walter's canteen and emptied it onto the thirsty ground. He turned and looked at the man who had left Esther to die with nothing. "Walk," Honaka commanded, his voice as final as a death sentence. He was not murdering Walter. He was leaving him to the judgment of the land. Walter stared at him, then at Esther, his face contorting with hatred and fear. He got to his feet and began to stumble away, a small, pathetic figure quickly swallowed by the vast, indifferent landscape. He would not survive. They both knew it. The immediate threat was gone. Esther looked at Honaka, her heart overflowing. He had been ready to die for her. She had found the strength to fight for him. They had faced the monster from her past together, and had won. Honaka walked to her, his face reverting to its usual mask, but his eyes were full of a new light. He reached out and gently took the turtle carving from her hand. No words were needed. He understood her courage. She understood his sacrifice. He turned and walked back into the cave, and after a moment she followed him, stepping from the harsh glare of the sun into the cool, quiet dark. The world outside no longer mattered. They were home. 2 weeks later, under a sky filled with a billion stars, Esther's labor began. It was long and difficult, but Honaka was with her through it all. A calm, steady presence, his hands gentle and sure. He held her, murmured words of encouragement in his own tongue, and wiped the sweat from her brow. In the deep, quiet hours just before dawn, her son was born. He was a small, healthy baby, with a surprisingly full head of downy white hair, just like his mother's. Esther held him to her breast, weeping with exhaustion and a joy so pure it felt sacred. Honaka looked at the child, his face filled with a tender reverence. He reached out a single finger and gently touched the baby's cheek. "He has your hair," Honaka said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "But his eyes, they are dark like the good earth." They lived on in the shelter of the mesa, the passing seasons marking the rhythm of their new life. The baby, whom Esther named Amos, grew strong and happy. His world was the loving gaze of his mother and the quiet, devoted presence of the man who was, in every way that mattered, his father. Honaka taught Esther the ways of the land, which plants healed, how to read the clouds. Esther, in turn, brought a softness to his solitary life, filling the silence with the warmth of companionship. They never spoke of love, not in the way the world she'd left behind defined it. Theirs was a connection forged in survival and cemented by mutual respect. It was in the way he would bring her the first small flower of spring, or the way she would save him the choicest piece of meat. It was in the shared smiles over their son's antics, and the comfortable silence they could share for hours. One evening, as Amos slept soundly, Esther sat beside the fire, watching Honaka mend a moccasin. She thought of Walter, of the jeering crowds, of the loneliness that had been her constant companion. It all felt like a story that had happened to someone else. She was no longer Esther Hale, the pale spectacle. Here, she had finally become just Esther, a woman, a mother. Honaka looked up, his eyes meeting hers across the flickering firelight. He had lost a family and been hollowed out by grief. She had never had a family and been hollowed out by cruelty. And here, in the unlikeliest of places, they had found the pieces of themselves in each other. Together, they had built a home not of wood or stone, but of unexpected kindness and resilient love. The turtle, after all, always carries its home on its back, and they, the strange and broken family brought together by fate, had finally found their way. If you believe that kindness can be found in the most unexpected places, and that everyone deserves a second chance, make sure you like this story and subscribe for more.